My husband told me I needed a break. Not a long one, just a week. A chance to visit my sister Megan in Colorado. A change of scenery would do you good, he said. Looking back, I should have questioned it. Daniel Harper wasn't the type to encourage time apart. In 22 years of marriage, he'd always wanted us together. At least, that's what I believed. So when he insisted I spend a week with Megan, I took it as concern, not strategy. 7 days later, I pulled into our driveway just after noon. The flight had been delayed. My suitcase was still in the trunk. I remember thinking how good it would feel to sleep in my own bed again. Then I walked up to the front door, and my key didn't work. At first, I thought I'd grabbed the wrong one. I tried again. Nothing. Again? Still nothing. That's when I noticed the lock. It wasn't the same. The brass deadbolt Daniel had installed years ago was gone. A newer one sat in its place. My stomach tightened. Then I saw the trash bags. 2 large black bags sitting beside the porch swing. For a second, I thought maybe we'd cleaned out the garage. Then I recognized my red sweater sticking through a small tear. I dropped my suitcase, walked over, opened the bag, and froze. My clothes, my shoes, my books, my belongings, stuffed into trash bags like garbage. I just stood there, staring, trying to make it make sense. It didn't. Then I heard laughter, a woman's laughter, coming from inside my house. I slowly turned toward the living room window and looked in. What I saw knocked the air out of my lungs. A blonde woman I'd never seen before stood in my kitchen, wearing my white bathrobe, pouring coffee into my favorite mug. She moved comfortably, confidently, like she'd done it 100 times. Then Daniel walked into the room. He smiled at her, wrapped an arm around her waist, and kissed her. I felt physically sick. The woman pointed toward the wall. Daniel nodded.
Then he reached up and removed one of our family photos, the one from our 20th anniversary trip. He handed it to her, and she placed it into a cardboard box, like she was redecorating, like I was being erased, one frame at a time. I pounded on the door, hard. The laughter stopped. The woman jumped. Daniel turned. The second he saw me standing there, his face changed, only for a moment. Then something even worse happened. He smiled. Not nervously, not guiltily, confidently, like he'd already planned this conversation. He opened the door halfway, but kept himself between me and the entrance. I stared at him. What the hell is going on? Daniel sighed. Actually sighed, like I was interrupting his afternoon. Then he said 4 words I'll never forget. "You don't live here." I laughed, because it was insane. "What?" "You heard me." I pointed at the trash bags. "My things are outside." I packed them carefully. I honestly thought I must have misheard him. "You packed them? Carefully?" I didn't want anything damaged. The arrogance of it left me speechless. Behind him, the woman looked uncomfortable, confused, like this wasn't the version of events she'd expected. I pointed into the house. "Who is she?" Daniel glanced back, then looked at me. "Her name is Claire." Claire gave a small, awkward wave. A wave! Inside my house! Wearing my robe! Holding my mug! I almost laughed again. It was so absurd. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You changed the locks, threw my belongings into trash bags, moved another woman into my home, and somehow you think I'm the one who should leave?" Daniel crossed his arms. "We've been separated for months." I stared at him. "No, we haven't. Emotionally, we have." There it was, the dumbest thing I'd heard all year.
emotionally. Apparently that was his defense. I looked at Claire. Her expression tightened. Something about that answer bothered her, too. Interesting. Very interesting. Because for the first time, I wondered whether Daniel was lying to both of us. I turned back to him. When exactly was I informed about this separation? His jaw tightened. Neither of us spoke. Then he said something that told me everything. You should go. Not, let's talk. Not, I'm sorry. Not, can we explain this? Just, you should go. 22 years. Reduced to that. I looked at the house, the porch, the windows, the life I'd spent decades building. Then I picked up one of the trash bags, turned around, and walked away. The hardest part wasn't the affair. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't even the locks. The hardest part was that Daniel never once tried to stop me. And somehow, I already knew this wasn't something he decided last week. This had been planned. For a very long time. I wish I could tell you I drove away angry, that I screamed, that I threw something, that I made a scene. The truth is, I was too shocked to do any of those things. When you've spent 22 years loving someone, your brain doesn't immediately accept that they've become a stranger. It keeps searching for an explanation, a misunderstanding, a reason. I spent the entire drive to my sister's house waiting for one. It never came. Megan opened the front door before I even reached the porch. One look at my face and she knew. What happened? I dropped the trash bag. Then I started crying. Not graceful crying. Not movie crying. The ugly kind. The kind that comes from realizing your entire life has been rearranged while you weren't looking. Megan wrapped her arms around me and didn't ask another question for almost an hour. For that, I'll always love her.
The next morning, I woke up hoping it had been some kind of nightmare. Then I saw my clothes piled in trash bags against Megan's guest room wall. Reality returned immediately. So did the anger. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was our neighbor, Linda. I expected sympathy. Instead, she sounded confused. Emily? Are you okay? I'm trying to be. There was a pause. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. I thought you'd moved out. I sat upright. What? Daniel said you two separated months ago. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Months ago? I had been sleeping beside him 7 days earlier. Apparently, reality had taken a different route while I was away. That conversation led to another, then another, and another. The details changed. The story didn't. Daniel had been telling people we were finished, that I'd emotionally checked out, that I wanted space, that I'd practically moved out already. Somehow, he'd managed to create an entire separation nobody bothered to tell me about, and people believed him. Why wouldn't they? He sounded convincing. He always had. The more I learned, the worse it got. Friends I'd known for years thought our marriage had been ending for months. Neighbors assumed Claire moved in after I left. Even people at our church believed Daniel's version of events. He hadn't just replaced me in the house, he'd been trying to replace me everywhere. That's when I stopped feeling heartbroken and started feeling suspicious. Because normal people don't build fake histories. Normal people don't spend months preparing witnesses. Normal people don't rehearse lies that carefully. This wasn't an impulsive affair. It was a plan, and plans leave evidence. A week after I came home, Megan and I started sorting through boxes she'd brought from our late father's storage unit, mostly because I needed a distraction. Anything was better than sitting around replaying the worst day of my life. We spent hours opening folders filled with old tax records, insurance forms, and paperwork nobody had touched in years. Then I found a manila folder. Across the front, in my father's handwriting, was a single word: house. I almost set it aside. Almost. Instead, I opened it.
Inside were documents I'd completely forgotten about. Trust documents, property records, old signatures, legal paperwork from years earlier. I wasn't even sure what I was looking at. Then I saw the address. My address. The address of the house Daniel was currently treating like his own. I stared at it for a long moment. Something about it felt important. I just didn't know why yet. That same evening, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. Hello? Silence. Then a woman's voice. Emily? I immediately knew who it was. Claire. The woman from my kitchen. The woman wearing my robe. The woman living in my house. Or at least what she thought was my house. What do you want? I asked. She hesitated. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. I think Daniel lied to me. I closed my eyes. Finally, someone else was catching up. Claire explained that things weren't adding up. The dates kept changing. The timelines kept changing. The story kept changing. One day, Daniel claimed we'd been separated for a year. The next day, it was 6 months, then 9 months, then something else. Every time she asked questions, he became defensive. Every time she asked for details, he got angry. Eventually, she stopped believing him.
Did you know about me? She asked quietly. No. Another pause. I didn't know about you either. For the first time, I heard genuine embarrassment in her voice. Not guilt, not arrogance, embarrassment. Because she was finally realizing she'd been manipulated too. We talked for almost 20 minutes. By the end of the call, one thing was clear. Daniel had been running multiple versions of the same story. One for me, one for Claire, one for our friends, one for the neighbors. And now those stories were starting to collide. After we hung up, I sat staring at the trust documents spread across Megan's dining room table. The property address stared back at me. For the first time in days, I felt something unexpected. Not sadness, not anger. Curiosity. Because if those papers meant what I thought they meant, Daniel Harper wasn't sitting comfortably in victory. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, and he had absolutely no idea. The next morning, I took the documents to a lawyer, not a team of lawyers, not months of investigation. One lawyer, one meeting, one folder. That's all it took. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She spent less than 5 minutes reviewing the paperwork. Then she looked up and smiled. Not the reassuring smile lawyers give nervous clients. The kind of smile people wear when they've just discovered somebody else has made a very expensive mistake. What? I asked. Sarah tapped the documents. Your husband changed the locks? Yes. And he's claiming the house belongs to him? Apparently. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she pushed the folder back toward me. Emily, your husband just tried to evict the homeowner. For a second, I simply stared at her. Then the meaning hit me. Hard. The trust. My father's trust. The house had never legally belonged to Daniel. Not even close. Years before he died, my father had transferred the property into a family trust. When he passed away, control transferred to me. Daniel lived there, paid bills there, built memories there, but ownership was mine, and always had been. I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt angry. Because Daniel knew, maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to know he wasn't acting like a man protecting his property. He was acting like a man gambling on my ignorance. And for a while, it had worked. Sarah prepared a legal notice that afternoon. Simple, direct. Restore my access immediately. Vacate the property. Stop interfering with the lawful owner. No drama, no threats, just facts. Sometimes facts are all you need. 2 days later, my phone rang. Claire, again. This time she sounded furious. Not confused, not uncertain.
furious. He lied about everything. I wasn't surprised. Apparently, Sarah wasn't the only person reviewing documents. Claire had started asking questions. Real questions. Questions Daniel couldn't answer. Questions that exposed every hole in his story.
"The house isn't his, is it?" she asked. "No." Silence. Then a long exhale. The sound of somebody realizing they'd bet on the wrong person. "I moved into another woman's house?" "Looks that way." "And he knew?" "Looks that way too." Claire lasted exactly 4 more days. Then she left. No dramatic fight, no screaming, no revenge scene. She simply packed her things and disappeared. Turns out lies make a terrible foundation for a relationship. Who would have guessed? Daniel, however, wasn't nearly as reasonable. According to Sarah, he'd spent several days arguing, claiming he'd earned the house, claiming it was unfair, claiming everybody was against him. Funny how often people say that after getting caught.
The final notice gave him 72 hours to leave. 72! The same amount of time he'd given me to collect the rest of my belongings. Life has a strange sense of humor. The last time I saw Daniel was from across the street. Movers carried boxes down the front steps, the same steps where my clothes had sat in black trash bags. The same porch where he'd looked me in the eye and told me I didn't live there anymore. Now, he was the one leaving. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't look confident. He looked small. A few days later, I walked through the house alone. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. My photographs were back where they belonged. My father's old clock was ticking again. Everything felt familiar, yet somehow different. Because homes survive betrayal better than people do. People often ask me what hurt the most. The affair, the lies, the humiliation. The answer is none of those things. The worst part was realizing Daniel had spent months planning my replacement while I was still planning our future. That's the kind of realization that changes you. A year later, life looks very different. The house is still mine. Megan still calls too often. And Daniel, last I heard, he's renting a small apartment across town. Alone. Very alone. Apparently, confidence disappears quickly when it's built on somebody else's property. Sometimes I sit on the front porch in the evening and think about the day my key stopped working. At the time, it felt like the end of everything. Now I know it wasn't. It was the beginning of seeing the truth. My husband changed the locks because he thought the house was his. He thought he could erase me from my own life. Instead, he ended up removing the only person who never belonged there. Him.